Union Station in downtown Washington, D.C. is an architectural gem from the turn of the 20th century. After decades of deterioration, the beautiful Beaux-Arts building has been restored, and the huge interior spaces again display the grandeur of the original design. The meticulous preservation was coupled with new commercial development and expanded rail services. Together, they bring more than 50,000 people to the station daily and generate revenue for the city. The redevelopment of Union Station was the result of a public-private sector partnership. By combining their resources, a national landmark was restored, a transportation hub was established, and a new downtown retail center and tourist attraction was created. And the process has dramatically revitalized the surrounding urban neighborhood. Union Station was completed in 1908. Designed by Daniel Burnham, its monumental scale and lavish materials symbolized the importance of rail travel and the growing status of the U.S. capital. In its heyday, more than 5,000 people worked there. Newsmakers routinely used the VIP reception rooms, and well-to-do travelers dined in the spacious restaurant. But the golden days of railroading faded by mid-century, and the Grand Terminal became obsolete. It was saved from demolition when the building was made a national landmark in 1964. The government converted the station into a national visitors center in the mid-1970s. Rail services were removed from inside the station, and a media display was installed. The center opened in 1976 for the nation's bicentennial, but failed to attract many tourists and closed 2 years later. In 1980, Amtrak sponsored a ULI panel to study the abandoned and deteriorating building. The railroad business was improving, and Amtrak needed better facilities.
They were running out of space in their so-called temporary quarters behind the station under the unfinished parking structure, so that they had a real reason to provide for a new modern terminal at the end of the Northeast Corridor. They were successful in getting Congress to go along with that.
Congress passed the Union Station Redevelopment Act in 1981. The act set forth restoration and development guidelines.
First, the building was to be made a railroad station again. Second, that the architectural and historic features that may have been destroyed since the building was constructed in 1907 be redone. Third, to explore with the private sector the possibility of commercial development within the station that would at least be sufficient to cover the cost of operation. And finally, to get the United States out of the railroad station business.
The Union Station Redevelopment Corporation was formed in 1983 to assist the public sector. USRC was funded by a $70 million grant from Amtrak, and a private sector developer was chosen as president.
First, the Secretary of Transportation is the chairman of the board. The president of Amtrak is the vice chairman of the board. The other members, the Federal Railroad Administrator, the mayor of the District of Columbia, and the president of the Federal City Council. Each one of those entities had an interest in seeing the redevelopment of the station being completed.
USRC selected Union Station Venture as the commercial developer. USV was a joint venture of 3 private sector firms.
Williams Jackson Ewing had direct responsibility for merchandising, leasing, and the related function of tenant coordination, which is really watches over the design and construction of tenant spaces. BTA was the project architect for the retail portion of the project, and LaSalle Partners was the financial partner, who also oversaw construction.
USRC renovated and restored the original station. They reviewed all designs and supervised all construction within the historic building, and built all structural additions, including Amtrak's new facilities. USV created the retail and adaptive reuse plans and the leasing strategy. They reviewed tenant designs and supervised construction in non-historic areas.
The design process worked with the inclusion of two major architectural firms, basically Harry Weiss and Associates, who was our firm in charge of the renovation and restoration, and Ben Thompson and Associates of the joint venture.
The design review process lasted 2 years and included 6 government agencies protecting the national landmark. Site preparation began in 1985, followed by general construction in 3 overlapping phases: restoration, commercial development, and tenant build-outs. Leasing began in 1986. The grand opening was held in September 1988. Union Station sits on a 12.5-acre site surrounded by government offices. It is 3 blocks from the U.S. Capitol, congressional office buildings, and residential neighborhoods on Capitol Hill. Nearby is the mall, with its concentration of museums, landmarks, and monuments where tourists congregate. The Washington metropolitan area has outstanding retail demographics. In addition, more than 100,000 people live within 2 miles of the station. More than 19 million visitors come to the nation's capital each year, and more than 7 million travelers use the station, a hub for buses, Amtrak, and commuter rail services, including the Washington subway system. Union Station was a unique property in a unique location, but a critical mass was needed to transform the station into a destination for shopping and entertainment. The USV retail plan more than doubled the commercial space suggested by USRC.
They projected retail of 100,000 square feet. We, when we came in with our proposal, were able to create in excess of 200,000 square feet. That we thought was borderline because there is no additional retail surrounding Union Station that would complement our retail statement.
I think what we saw was something that could be much more dynamic and much more extensive. A lot more retail, a lot more shopping, a real destination for commercial uses, a real destination for transportation, of course, but also a social destination.
Union Station was transformed into a mixed-use complex where transportation facilities now blend with commercial development. Tenant locations coordinate with target markets, circulation patterns, and structural limitations of the landmark building. The original station had 2 street-level sections over a basement. In the head house, the West Hall was used for baggage and ticketing. The main hall was the waiting area, and the East Hall was the station restaurant. Rail services were located in the train concourse. During redevelopment, this historic concourse was converted into 3 levels of commercial space, and a new train concourse was added to accommodate rail services. The head house now contains a retail gallery in the East Hall, and general merchandise shops in the main and West Halls, along with a few cafes. Tenant spaces here are relatively small due to architectural constraints of the historic halls. Destination restaurants with outside entrances occupy the former restrooms and the presidential waiting room. High ceilings in these areas made them less suitable for other retail uses. The main hall leads into the historic concourse, where Amtrak's new ticket counter occupies the central space. General merchandise shops are located along the west end, while the east end has more clothing stores. In the new train concourse, traveler services, including fast food, are placed near the train gates. Along the west end, several cafes are located near the side street entrances to the station and near the entrance to the Metro subway system. Second-floor offices also have street-level entrances. On the lower level, the entrance to Metro is located near commuter retail and food services. The food court and the 9-screen cinema occupy most of the remodeled basement, which was lowered and expanded through excavation. A new mezzanine contains most of the clothing stores and more restaurants, including new second levels of 2 on the ground floor. The Columbus Club is leased for private functions. The mezzanine was added to increase leasable space and to create larger floor plates for national retailers. A walkway connects the mezzanine to the parking garage.
We have over 200,000 square feet of common area in the building. The overall building is about 600,000 feet. We have about 200,000 feet of retail. Amtrak uses 75,000 feet for their station operations. They have 100,000 feet for the office operations.
The four-story parking garage behind the station was completed by the D.C. government. It has spaces for 1,550 cars and 80 buses, and is operated by a national company who leases the facility from USRC. The garage connects to the mezzanine level.
Union Station is a project that appeals to quite a number of different markets. There was obviously the train traveler market, the office population, surrounding residential, and the tourist. But the one thing that we wanted to become was a destination, substantive retail location.
The mezzanine is targeted to shoppers and holds a concentration of fashion clothing shops near several restaurants. There are no department store anchors, but Ann Taylor is at one end of this level, and the Limited is at the other. National retailers were initially skeptical about the Capitol Hill area, but success has now brought many to the specialty center. To animate the space, a sweeping staircase has views of all three concourse levels. New escalators and elevators are nearby. The ground level of the historic concourse, with its imposing architecture, is now the central passageway through the station. Amtrak's new ticket counter was placed here to be visible from the street and accessible to the new train concourse just beyond. The new train concourse is bright with light from the barrel vault roof. The design relates to the profile of the original station. Service retail, including fast foods, are located here for the convenience of rail travelers moving to the train gates and to the platforms used by Amtrak and commuter lines. The lower level of the station is a hub of activity. The colorful food court occupies space that was once a dirt floor basement used for parking and storage. The food court is very successful and is usually crowded. An increase in noontime metro riders is attributed to its appeal. Nearby is another popular attraction, a 9-screen cinema complex that accepts phone-in reservations charged to credit cards. The original grade was lowered 5 to 11 feet to accommodate the theaters, and the excavation scars on the original walls are still visible.
Cinemas and specialty retail projects work as a very good anchor. If you don't have a department store, major restaurants, and cinema, add a great dimension to the project, especially for evening business, which is part of the project we were concerned about.
Near the cinema, there are carry-out food counters and a food market, which are also convenient to the metro entrance at the far west end. Metro Rail brings more than 4 million commuters through the station annually. Metro also has street-level access outside the West Hall, where carriages once pulled up to the station. And inside the historic hall, an English-style pub and specialty shops now occupy former ticketing and baggage handling areas. The spectacular main hall of the station has been carefully restored. The huge public space is 211 feet long and 627 feet wide, half an acre. New perimeter shops are now wedged between the original columns, and merchandise is displayed on marble floors restored with stones from the original quarry. A balcony surrounds the main hall, and original metal cast statues still stand guard there and still hold shields that were added to meet modesty standards of the turn of the century. Above the monumental space, the vaulted ceiling glistens again with 22-karat gold leaf inserts. Vents for new air handling systems blend invisibly with other ceiling panels.
We tore out all of the existing utilities down to the bone and replaced them all. Obviously, they didn't have air conditioning at the time it was built, so our air conditioning system is prepared in fairly unique forms. For example, in the main hall, we dropped the cool air down from those gold squares you see in the ceiling.
In the center of the hall is a new wooden kiosk, the most controversial element of the renovation. Preservationists opposed the modern intrusion, but the developer insisted.
This was a space that we needed to have a welcome to our visitors in, we had to have a revenue-producing activity in this space. And there was a great deal of negotiation over what a proper activity would be for this.
The kiosk has a display board for train arrivals and departures and houses a double-decker cafe bar. Extended seating here and at nearby restaurants helps to fill the expansive space. Destination restaurants occupy the former men's and ladies' restrooms, now remodeled and leased to national operators. New mezzanines were built below the original high ceilings to increase seating capacity. In the East Hall, merchandise is sold from shops nestled between the original columns and from small mahogany display cases which are folded and moved aside when the hall is used for special events.
In the West Hall and the East Hall, the spaces were too small for traditional retail uses. In that case, we created a series of turnkey spaces for small independent merchants, as opposed to chain leasing that part of the project.
The East Hall, once a restaurant, was the most decorative part of the historic station. Original designs, colors, and fixtures were researched and duplicated. Elaborate stenciling was restored by skilled artisans. At the far end of the East Hall is the former presidential waiting room. The decoration here was also authentically restored, and the space converted into a destination restaurant. The presidential seals are still visible.
We had the advantage of having the architectural working drawings that had been prepared in Burnham's office in 1903 to 1905, so we went back to do an accurate either replication or restoration. We also had designated certain rooms within the historic structure that we would replicate exactly, and then other rooms that we would not.
All new additions, like the fountains and the kiosk, had to be stylistically distinct and structurally independent from the original building. Even the new mezzanine in the historic concourse is self-contained.
All of the mezzanine structure is separated by a gap between the existing walls and the new walls, so that if we failed and this whole thing needed to be disassembled, the private developer improvements needed to be disassembled, it could be done without ruining or destroying the historic fabric. Where we did disrupt, if you will, the existing fabric was we cut a hole in the concourse floor. This hole is a wonderful gallery in which to view activities of different kinds within the station.
There are 140 tenants at Union Station. The mix is 65% retail and 35% food. The average lease is 5 to 7 years with an estimated annual turnover of 5%. Most retail spaces are small. The average is 2,000 square feet. This is due to structural limitations and a USV leasing strategy which emphasizes diversity. National chains downsize to fit into the plan and average 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. Tenants finance and construct their own spaces, but adhere to USV design standards. 85% of storefronts are transparent, only incandescent lighting is allowed, and signage is professionally rendered. Deliveries are moved through the building on push carts and received by some tenants through their front doors. Base annual rents per square foot range from $20 to $120. Utilities are metered individually. Add-ons for maintenance and marketing range from $20 to $50 per square foot. The USV marketing strategy emphasizes special events which bring large numbers of diverse groups to Union Station.
We spend a very small amount of money on advertising. We spend a lot of money on promotional events, entertainment, so that when people are here, they just have a wonderful time.
Activities range from exhibits to inaugural balls. The 3 historic halls are rented for special events each year. The Columbus Club on the mezzanine is leased to meeting planners and also used for private functions.
The sales per square foot in the property are in the $450 to $500 square foot level range right now. They vary anywhere from $300 a square foot for the largest stores all the way up to as high as $2,500 a foot for some of the smaller food court operations in the building. Total sales Last year were 87 million, and in 1991 we're projecting sales in excess of 90 million.
Sales rank nationally in the top 5% of urban specialty centers. But unlike most retail centers, Union Station is open 24 hours each day, and security personnel are very visible. Security, maintenance, and other day-to-day activities are overseen by LaSalle Partners, the managing agent.
The federal government owns the property, and it's been leased on a long-term basis to the private sector, the three partners involved.
The federal government acquired the site for $10 million plus assumption of the mortgage. Private sector development costs of $42 million were financed by LaSalle Partners. No equity was required, since the projected revenues supported a large debt service. Amtrak, a semi-private corporation, made an interest-free loan of $73 million to pay for historic preservation of the building and reintegration of the train facilities. The District of Columbia provided $40 million from unused federal highway funds to build the new train concourse and complete the parking garage. USRC negotiated a net lease with USV. Commercial tenants sublet space from USV, including Amtrak, who pays USV $1 million annually in office rent. USV pays USRC an annual base rent of $1 million plus a participation rent, typically 50% of net operating income. USRC pays the debt service on the government-held mortgage, contributes to the capital maintenance fund, and after deducting operating expenses, makes loan payments to Amtrak. Few believed that a decaying property in a marginal urban area could become a successful retail center, but 1,200 to 1,500 people are now employed at Union Station, and sales tax revenues exceed $4 million. And the redevelopment has sparked neighborhood revitalization. There are 4 million square feet of new office space nearby, with prospects for future development. USV has created a unique, mixed-use urban center. USRC has served a critical role by guiding the project to successful completion, while protecting the priorities of the private sector.
The way the public sector structured their involvement, I think, is a very important lesson. The creation of this nonprofit entity, the bringing in of people from the private sector, the party to basically balance the interests, if you will, of the public sector and the private sector. I think those are very important lessons to be learned from this project.
Well, I think that we were successful in combining a number of elements together in a way that has made it a highly successful commercial venture, a substantially successful railroad and subway operation, and all of them doing very well from a financial standpoint. It's been good for the developer, it's been good for the tenants who have stayed, and of course it's good for the United States through the repayment of all their debts.